section stays parallel. And I will keep going and overlapping that until it gets really dark near this edge. Now, the one that is really one that people make mistakes with a lot is stippling. Okay, and here's the mistake that people make with stippling. Let's get a fresh piece of scratch paper actually. Okay, the big mistake that people make with stippling is this. Okay, like, oh, I have a lot of stippling I'm gonna do, so I'm just gonna do it as fast as I can. Okay, and so, oh, I need to do all these dots, I'm just gonna do them fast. But here's what happens when you do fast. See the little dash marks, how they're not dots, they have like a little tail on them. That little tail is gonna make your stippling not look nice. Okay, so when you're doing stippling, you want to have like a 1/4 second hesitation with each dot, and you want to look at your dots. So don't do this and look away and talk to your friends or, you know, whatever. You want to be paying attention to the dots that you're making. And once you get comfortable doing it, then you can go a little bit faster, but we don't want dots with tails on them. Those tails make your drawing not look very nice. Now, the cool thing about stippling is the most forgiving of all the ink shading techniques. If you're nervous about doing an ink drawing, stippling is great because it's very low commitment, okay? So if you're like, I'm concerned about how well I'm gonna do on this, stippling's the way to go. Sharpie also does really nice stippling, but this drags out marks even more than this type of marker does because Sharpies have more like ink that moves a little bit more. So if you're gonna do Sharpie, you wanna pay attention to that. Also with Sharpie, you need to start it on a piece of scratch paper because you get these little super pale dots until the tip gets hydrated. Okay, and Sharpie will make bigger dots. So if I just hesitate for a second, I get big dots, which those can get away from you, okay? With stippling, smaller dots tend to look cleaner, okay? And so this stippling one over here is just gonna be a slow and steady where you're just kind of like taking your time, and you can do it in Sharpie or in the other marker or whatever you want. Also, this is another one where for this dark edge, you want to make sure you're not going and just coloring it in because it's going to have a completely different texture you're going to see. So you can look at the handout and see. You can tell this whole thing was stippled and that no one went in and just scribbled in the darkest area. And stippling works to create value, to create light and dark areas based on how far apart you put the dots. So as I'm close together over here, the dots will make darker areas. As I move out this way, they make lighter areas when they get further apart. And so that's kind of how you're gonna approach it. The other thing that's really hard is to not end up making like patterns with the dots. You want to keep them fairly random. And so you do have to be deliberate about that and pay attention. See right there, I hesitated. Whoops. But in terms of mark making, stippling is the most forgiving. And so any of you that are like, ooh, I'm nervous about pen because I know I can't erase, use stippling. Stippling will make it much easier for you because one little mark that's off in stippling doesn't make as big of an impact as one mark that's off in, like, say hatching, for example. Like a couple of my little crookedy lines are much more obvious with hatching. And so I would just go through and I would keep developing my overlapping because remember, we want to have a gradient where it's fading from dark to light. Okay, down here, this little guy is a perfect thing to practice your hatching. Now, this is done with a ballpoint pen size. And so you could do ballpoint pen if you want, you could do marker if you want. I'm gonna do ballpoint because I want these fine lines to show more. Now, all the time in art, we're like, don't trace, don't outline stuff, whatever. But when it comes to marker shading, this is a time where I usually use some sort of transfer technique or tracing to get my image onto it because I'm going to be doing so much work with pen that I don't want to spend 10 hours doing a grid expansion drawing to get it exactly right first. Okay, so the other thing I do when I'm preparing for doing ink work is I will draw in where my lighter and darker areas are with pencil, because I can go back when I'm done with my work and erase them. Okay, so I'm gonna look at these shading techniques that this artist used, which is hatching, and I'm just gonna go in and I'm gonna start doing hatching in the areas that artist did hatching. And I'm going to look at how they went into their other areas to integrate that hatching. And I'm going to just do the same thing. And this is a really important thing to practice so that you can do this well when you're doing your final drawing. Because what we're looking at is, how am I, as an artist, going to be creating a similar light and dark effect for the person that I am drawing. And this one, the ballpoint pen, is the tool to use for sure. And I love ink shading because you can see the gradients and the values are going to establish themselves really quickly. And so it's super gratifying because you can see all of this progress really quickly and start getting three-dimensional form that is nice and well developed really fast. Now, you may have already noticed that I'm not super concerned with copying the directions that the other artist that drew this drawing used for theirs. I'm just concerned about creating value. And so this is how you're going to approach this. Now, don't be tempted to go in and just kind of be like, that's dark, I'm just going to scribble that whole area dark. Okay, it does take some time and some patience. To get that established. And all the time that I'm working, I'm thinking about, like, am I being consistent about my lines going the same direction? Am I being neat? Am I making sure that this is going to be true to the areas of value in the original drawing? The other thing to think about is your person, if you're doing a person, whoops, I went past the edge of the face there. Now it's got a unibrow. The person you're drawing is going to be like subject to the texture that the ink line shading technique creates. And so I'm always aware of that, like, do I want to make this person look, you know, rougher in these areas? And so that's another one where, like, stippling does keep things a little softer. Now, you may have already noticed the definition even of the outline of this face is done with straight lines. So they're staying fairly true to the style of the medium and the shading techniques used. So this is all straight line shading. So even their outline's done with straight lines. And so that's something to just kind of like keep in mind, because that same consistency and approach will make your drawing look better too. Okay, so that's how we're going to approach establishing this drawing and making it look like the original drawing that we're working from. Okay, so it's going to be a slow process here to develop this nicely, but we want to be following the shading that we see in our source photo, in our drawing, in whatever we're working from, to be able to generate light and dark areas in our work. Okay, that's basically how we're gonna do it. So make sure you put your name on your paper, make sure you have all your different tools that you're using, and always have your scratch paper so that you can test out your techniques in advance or check and make sure your pen's working, all of that stuff. Okay, so that's what we're gonna do to be starting to prepare for ink and pen illustration. After you're done with your warm-ups, we're gonna have all of these thumbnails that we're gonna be doing. Okay, you can see the pens are gonna bleed through the page. Okay, all right, there we go. And that's how we're starting this assignment.